And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
What's going on, Houston? Welcome to another edition of Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and we're coming live from the studio at KTSU. Man, I was reminded of an old song, Baby, It's Cold Outside. And, for those who are from the East Coast and from Alaska, maybe it's not cold to you, but at 37 degrees and falling, seeing some snow flurries outside, it's definitely on the cold side. But I want to thank you for being with us on this evening as we delve into some subjects, man, that are well, what can I say? I mean, it's just a level of insanity going on that I think all of us are aware of, and we know it exists. But man, to see it and to experience it has been something else. In the midst of all that's going on happened on Wednesday, January the 6th, when the rioters, the insurrectionists, stormed the Capitol to minimally stop the certification, the ratification of the Electoral College votes, which is simply ceremonial, to go in with the violence that they had at hand. We're discovering every day more stories about what was their intent. Those who were shouting, not just to grab and do harm to Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, but they were hollering to do harm to Vice President Mike Pence. I mean, you would think, I thought like he was on their side, right? But man, it was just absolutely insane, and the inside information that they had. So, for example, their attempt to grab hold of the House Whip, Majority Whip, Jim Clyburn, the House of representative from South Carolina, but they didn't go to his office where his name appears. They went to a private workroom where his name doesn't appear, and nobody knows that's where he works except those who work in the Capitol. They're the only ones that would know that. And so, the question is, how did they get that information? And the fact that officers let them in and all of those things. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I would like to spend some time tonight talking a little bit about the election in Georgia and the historic election that took place there in electing both now Senator-elect Warnoff and Senator-elect Ossoff. I'm sorry, Warnock and Ossoff. I'm combining names there. But I'm really excited about that historic election and talk about that. But before we do that, I've got a special guest that I am excited to have on. And let me take care of just a couple of housekeeping matters before we bring him on. First of all, if you'd like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on Instagram at DZ Cofield. You can also follow me on Facebook at DZ Cofield. And you can follow me on Twitter at, you guessed it, DZ Cofield. Super excited to have our guest on today. He is nationally and internationally respected as a virologist, as a health specialist. And if you hear his voice, if you see his face, if you're online, you will recognize him. He has been numerous times on CNN and MSNBC and all of the other networks talking about the coronavirus. And I just want to give you some facts that you may or may not be aware of, because things are really getting out of hand when you think about COVID-19 and what's happening. Currently hospitalized, this was as of this morning, 131,000, right at 131,000 people were hospitalized, over 23,000 in ICUs, and almost 8,000 people on ventilators. And I heard a number, and we'll ask Dr. Peter Hotez from the Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston to confirm this. But since the 1st of January, over 24,000 people have died as a result of COVID-19. We talked about the surge that was going to come out of Thanksgiving. There were people that still felt the need to leave and go and travel. We talked about the surge that was going to come out of Christmas, and there were still people who felt the need to travel. And now we're looking at a third surge that is still, I guess some would say, in the incubation stage for those who are out partying for New Year's. And we're seeing the numbers go up exponentially. Let me welcome to Real World, Real Talk, Dr. Peter Hotez. Dr. Peter Hotez, welcome. How are you doing, sir?
Good, Dr. Cofield. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Great to have you on. I want to thank you, first of all, for always giving us clarity of thought, even in the midst of what many deemed to be the pressure that was put on some in the medical community, especially by the president, those who are on the COVID task force. You always provided clear numbers based on the science. And I really want to say thank you for all of us for giving us that kind of sanity in the midst of all that was going on.
Thank you very much. It was, it was a tough year, 2020, going up against that whole disinformation campaign that came out of the White House. And, I didn't quite know what it was. And it took me a couple of weeks to figure it out. And, my history going up against the anti-vaccine groups positioned me. And, my wife, Ann, saw how upset I was getting because, the message is you're supposed to stick to the science, don't go into that political realm. But, when you saw how they were deliberately downplaying the epidemic and saying that COVID deaths were due to other causes and dismissing masks, discrediting masks, and saying nothing, of course, about the devastation in the African-American and Hispanic communities across our country, I had to say something. So my wife Ann said, this is eating you up. You need to just say it like it is. And there you are. I'm never hoping to politicize it, but really needing to call it out in order to disentangle it. So it's a tough year, and I thought the worst was behind us, and then the apocalypse happens this last week. I don't, you said it so eloquently. I just can't believe something like that could happen to our country.
It's unbelievable. Over 24,000 people have died of COVID since the first of the year. This is just amazing. Here's one of the things that I have contended, Dr. Hotez, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. I have said I don't see this sadly ending anytime soon, even with a vaccine, because people who were not in favor of wearing a mask, who were calling it a hoax, are not going to be in line to get a vaccine. Like if it was too much of a hoax to wear a mask, something that simple, why would you get a vaccine? And to hear people still on their deathbed with their dying breath saying, I thought it was a hoax, is just really disconcerting with me when you see us fast approaching 400,000 people having died in our country.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And not even I thought it was a hoax, still insisting it is a hoax is their last dying word. So they can't even die with dignity. That's how awful this has been. The numbers are horrific, 4,000 deaths per day. I see that continuing for a while. We're going to get to 400,000 deaths by around the time of the inauguration. And that number means a lot because that's roughly the number of American GIs who died in World War II. We're talking a catastrophe on that scale. That we can vaccinate our way out of it. In fact, that's the only recourse we have now because we've refused as a nation, as you point out, to wear masks, to do the social distancing. We've refused all efforts at COVID-19 control, and this White House refused to launch a national control program. So our last recourse now is to vaccinate our way out of it. And we crunched some numbers with a group at City University in New York. I have a longstanding collaborator there, and we came up with that you have to vaccinate 75% of the U.S. population in order to halt virus transmission. So that's a really high bar. We're talking, if you look at the population, 340 million Americans, we have to vaccinate roughly 240 million Americans between now and September 1, let's say, end of August, September 1. And when you divide that by 8 months, 240 million Americans, you see the numbers. That's 30 million Americans every month. It's a million Americans a day. And we're just not set up for it. And we don't have the infrastructure in place, despite everything we've been hearing from Operation Warp Speed. The good news is that our leadership in Houston, Harris County is stepping up and trying to put that infrastructure in place. They did a big immunization in the Minute Maid Park yesterday. That's the kinds of things we're going to have to do. But as a whole, the nation's not really thinking about this.
Boy, you're talking about 1 million people a day. We were supposed to have 20 million vaccinated by the end of 2020. We came in at somewhere, around 4 million or so. What can be done? And for you as a scientist, I know you're on the other side of the table, not necessarily the distribution of the vaccine, but definitely the creation of the vaccine. What do you see as going wrong with us failing to get the vaccine out there?
Well, I think one of the things was, when we heard that, when the president told us there was a 4-star military general in place for logistics, I thought that things were going to be well in hand. But what they didn't tell us was, by logistics, they meant they knew how to put the boxes onto the back of the UPS and FedEx trucks, keep them cold, which I guess is something, and then send it to the States. And then it was adios. The metaphor I used was they just sent out 40 million boxes of IKEA furniture, and then the States got it. They open up the box and they see assembly required, and no one told us that, and that's a problem. So there was never a plan to vaccinate the American people. That was sending the boxes. That was the logistics that the federal government was talking about. So now we've got to scramble and put that in place. And the only infrastructure, better than anyone, there's not much of an infrastructure, especially in the low-income neighborhoods. You don't have an HEB. Do you even have an HEB in the Fifth Ward? I don't even know if there is an HEB in the Fifth Ward, or what do you have for Randall's, and what do you have for all the CVSs? So how are we going to vaccinate people in low-income neighborhoods? I mean, I think the pharmacy chains are trying to step up and doing what they can, and the hospitals are doing what they can, but that's not going to be enough. I mean, even if we max out all the pharmacies and the HEBs and the Krogers and the Randalls, and we get the hospital systems maxing out, we're still not going to be able to do that high throughput vaccination. So problem number one is creating the venues, right? Creating those hubs, especially in some of the low income neighborhoods. That's a priority. I think the second is, when you look at the rules that they put in place, the 1A, 1B, 1C. I get the 1A. The 1A is the hospital workers and the nursing homes. That makes sense to me. But after that, it starts getting really fussy really quickly. And one of the things we learned with the diagnostic testing and everything else is we can't do complicated things anymore as a nation. Once things get a bit complicated, everything kind of falls apart. So I think, the rules that the CDC and the ACIP committee put in place, 1B, 1C, that would work really well in Singapore, but I don't know how we're going to implement that here. So we've got to fix that. And then we're going to need more vaccines. So, the mRNA technology, it's good in terms of levels of protection. I got my 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, but it was never meant to be the workhorse for Operation Warp Speed. It was never be the workhorse to vaccinate the millions that we have to vaccinate. It's still a brand new technology that is not easy to scale. So we're going to have to get the other ones up, the 2 adenovirus vaccines, the particle vaccines. We have a recombinant protein vaccine that we're producing now in India, making 1 billion doses of that, which is really exciting for us. I've never made 1 billion of anything before, so that's pretty amazing. But all those stars have to align, otherwise the deaths are going to continue. And that's when I got really scared, when I realized that no one was looking after us, at least at the federal level, yet again. I mean, I guess I should have expected it, right? We missed the entry of the virus coming in from Europe into New York. We never got the diagnostic testing fixed. We never tried to halt that big surge across the southern states in the summer and now this fall surge. Why would I expect anything different? I feel like, Charlie Brown with Lucy pulling the football again out from under me.
Yeah.
But there we are. So, but this time we have no other recourse. We've squandered every opportunity. All we've got left is to vaccinate our way out of it. So we've got to make this work as a country.
So, Dr. Hotez, I think for me, observing, it seems like one of the biggest problems that I don't think we can overcome is the fact that we are a country that was given birth to out of rebellion. And so we're not interested in listening to anybody tell us what we cannot do. And the countries that have successfully dealt with COVID were able to say, we're going to shut down, number one, everything. Number two, we're not going to allow people to fly in and out of our country or come in and out of our country. And if they do, we are going to strictly require them to quarantine 14 days in place. And if they come out of quarantine within those 14 days, we're going to arrest them. Our 14-day quarantine has been a suggestion, right? Like there's nobody that's going around picking up people and arresting them if they move. When Governor Abbott said we're going to shut down the border from Louisiana, I mean, people were just driving in. It's like, where's the shutdown? Is there a toll or something? I mean, there was nothing there. And so to me, if we don't stop people from traveling across the country and traveling internationally, and if we don't mandate this, somebody said to me, well, they need to tie the vaccine to getting this next $2,000 stimulus check. I say that'd be a great idea, but it's not going to happen. I don't see any way for us to ever play catch up. It just seems like we're just trying to catch up and things are just rolling on. President-elect Biden has said he is going to open up the supplies and really get as many people vaccinated with the first-time vaccine as possible. I've heard talk today that he's thinking about, of course, holding some back, but he wants to push out as much as possible, trusting the supply line to provide what is needed on the back end for a lot of people to get their second shot. There have been people in favor of it. There's been people against it. Where do you stand on that?
So generally, I support it because we have to get more vaccine into people as quickly as possible. But here's the thing. When I look at that data coming out of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, a single dose of the vaccine is highly variable in what it does. And some people, one of the things that we'd learned working on coronavirus vaccines for the last decade for SARS and MERS and now this COVID-19 is that it's all about what's called virus neutralizing antibodies. If you can get high levels in this response to the vaccine of what's called high levels of virus neutralizing antibody, you'll get protection. And the problem is when you look at that vaccine in a single dose, it's all over the map. Some people respond vigorously, others don't. And that's why you give the second dose, because it ensures everybody gets protected. So in two doses, it's an excellent vaccine. In a single dose, you don't know what you're getting, really. I mean, it's kind of a roll of the dice on the craps table. You don't know whether you're protected or not. So the key to this, if you're going to give out all that single dose now, you have to guarantee to the American people that anyone who gets that dose will get their second dose within 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the vaccine. And I think the American people are worried about that because the U.S. government has come up small every time in the things that they've said. And this time they can't mess it up. They've got to have that second dose available.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield. You're listening to The Choice 90.9 KTSU on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. I am excited to have with me Dr. Peter Hotez from the Baylor College of Medicine, and I'm thankful that he was able to take some time out of his busy schedule. I know he's scheduled to go back on CNN tonight. Dr. Hotez, what are you saying now, and what do you think is the strategy to try to whittle away at these tremendous numbers? Yesterday, we hosted, along with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a testing and a vaccine distribution. The vaccine distribution was relegated to seniors and those who were of a highly vulnerable population. I heard somebody say that the 1A and 1B should be treated more like suggestions than requirements. And I've heard medical professionals, I've been shocked to hear some medical professionals say they're not taking the vaccine. It's not being required of them, and they have a choice. What do you say to those of us who may be weary based on what we're seeing and what we're hearing around taking this vaccine?
It's a great question. There's a lot of misinformation and outright disinformation out there. Disinformation, people deliberately trying to deceive, and unfortunately, the anti-vaccine stuff dominates the internet right now. But the honest truth is, the only way that you can guarantee that you will not go into a hospital or an intensive care unit is to have those virus neutralizing antibodies in your system through 2 doses of the vaccines. The social distancing is important. The masks are important, but ultimately, the one thing that's guaranteed to save your life is getting vaccinated, and especially in the African American and Hispanic communities. Why do I say that? When you look at the numbers from the Centers for Disease Control, you're always hearing about people over the age of 65. Well,
Right.
when you hear about 65 is because only 13% of non-Hispanic whites die under the age of 65. But in the African American Hispanic communities, it's 30 to 35%. So a third of the deaths in the Hispanic and African American communities are under the age of 65. But what they don't tell you is what that really means. What they don't tell you is that's a whole generation of mothers and fathers, moms and dads, right, in their 40s and 50s and early 60s. That's who you're holding funerals for, and brothers and sisters. So it's those. So we're losing a whole generation of families because of this, and that's what I worry. Especially when you hear about in the African American community, people saying they're going to hold off on taking vaccines. I'm thinking of all those 40, 50, 60-year-old mothers, fathers, young grandparents who we're not going to have around next year or by next Christmas. And that's where the urgency has to be. That's where we have to do a full court press to do everything we can to encourage people to get the vaccine. I mean, it's bad enough that all the people who want to get vaccine can't get it. Hopefully we'll fix that. But then the other piece to that is communicating. And we've never communicated about vaccines. We don't have a system in place. Operation Warp Speed was a good program in terms of scientific rigor and that sort of thing, but they never put forward a communication strategy. They left it to the pharma CEOs who were awful. I mean, it was all about the stock dumping and trading, and they were just poor communicators. So hopefully in the Biden administration, they'll step up doing that. And it's got to be more than just public service announcements. People have to hear from the scientists and why they should get the vaccine. And that's why, when you gave me the opportunity to come on your show tonight, I jumped at that because, there are not too many opportunities to really reach out to the African American community in particular about the importance of getting vaccinations. I really appreciate this chance.
Let's talk a little bit about something that I know you're passionate about, and that's the whole anti-vaccine movement and how it's been directed. And what I love that you pointed out was the thing that African Americans and the right-wing Trump supporters seem to have in common, but not for the same reason. It seems like these are the two groups that are saying we're not going to take it. Now, I know a lot of African American people who are very conscientious, and they're wearing masks. Some of the younger ones are not wearing masks like they should, but I know a lot of older people are wearing their masks. But there's this apprehension, and you hear people talk about Tuskegee, but I heard you say that you think was by design. It was intentional.
That's right. So a couple of points. So we did a survey that just got published in a medical journal. We did it with a group of I'm not a social scientist, I'm a vaccine scientist, but I collaborated with a bunch of social scientists at Texas A&M University, headed by a guy named Tim Callahan, where he did this survey of who's not going to take the vaccine, even if it were offered to them. And the two groups that rose to the top were one, what were called Trump voters, and number two, African American population. Those were the two groups not getting vaccinated. And you're saying, boy, that's, I never thought I'd hear much in common for those two groups. But it turns out it reproduces almost an identical study that the Kaiser Family Foundation did a few weeks back. They have found the same thing. African American community and what they called Republicans. They didn't call them Trump voters, they called them Republicans, but you get the idea. So I think there's two different forces going on. With the Trump voters, we started to see in Texas around 2015, around the time that Trump announced he was going to run for the election, a steep rise in the number of parents in Texas and Oklahoma refusing to vaccinate their kids. And it was under this banner, what they called health freedom, medical freedom, this kind of libertarian streak that started, and the groups like that, like Texans for Vaccine Choice, which were one of the first groups to form around then, and Oklahomans for Vaccine Choice, started getting a lot of funding from far right-wing political donors. So there was this link between political extremism on the far right and the anti-vaccine movement. But then the other, in the African-American community, historically, being in vaccines for 4 decades now, I've never, up until a year or two ago, thought of the African-American communities really pushing back on vaccines. I've always seen pretty high rates of vaccinations. And so this, to me, is more recent. Now, I'm not an expert. I haven't done a deep enough dive, so I'd be curious to hear, especially from the African-American medical community, what their thoughts are. But it seems to things have gotten worse in the last couple of years. And one of the things that I've noticed is some of the big national anti-vaccine groups began targeting specific ethnic groups. So in 2018, they targeted the Orthodox Jewish communities up in New York, and they used really inflammatory language, right? Comparing vaccines to the Holocaust and all this kind of stuff. And they were parading around in yellow Jewish stars. If you were going to be sent to the concentration camps, you had to wear this yellow Jewish stars, and they had them sewn on, and it has the word vax in it, looking like Hebrew letters. I mean, you can't think of anything more inflammatory than that. And it worked, though. The Orthodox Jewish community stopped vaccinating their kids, and there were terrible measles epidemics. 2018, 2019 landed 18 kids in the ICU. And I said, wow, I just can't believe that the anti-vaccine groups were allowed to target the Orthodox Jewish community like that. Then in 2019, I started seeing these stuff go up on social media, on Twitter, these anti-vaccine rallies in Harlem, New York. They were called the Harlem Vaccine Rally, and all the lead guys in the anti-vaccine movement were up there. And they even held a rally in the Riverside Church, which, as you know, is, one of the iconic churches in the civil rights movement. The Reverend Sloan Coffin, and guess what language they were using? You can imagine, if they were targeting the Jewish community with Holocaust language, they went right to the Tuskegee language, and it was really inflammatory, all misinformation, disinformation. So the question I'm asking is, I understand the structural and historic racism and the distrust in the African-American community, and deservedly so. But I'm asking, how much of this is new due to the deliberate targeting by anti-vaccine groups? And I don't have the answer, but it's something that really has to be looked into.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think what's amazing to me is, the people who are part of these anti-vaccine movements are not in these movements because they care about Orthodox Jewish community or they care about the African American community. They're just anti something, and in this instance, they're just anti-vaccine. And with all of the misinformation that's out there, and the flat out lies that have been told, I can see it being a problem. But I was very much shocked to be on a call with doctors and nurses and to hear them talking about when they were getting their vaccine and the first vaccine and the second vaccine, and then to hear one say, "I'm not getting it," and I literally was just like, "Whoa!" Like, wow. I had somebody who asked me. I received my first dose of Moderna, so I'm waiting on the second dose, and I had someone ask me, what I thought about it. They didn't know I had gotten my vaccine. And I said, they started asking me about side effects and some of the, again, a lot of the misinformation around Bell's palsy and some other things. And, I said, here's what I know. I haven't heard of anybody dying from Bell's palsy, but there's about almost 400,000 people who've died of COVID. And so if I have Bell's palsy, if that's a side effect and it's temporary, or death,
and it's rare. We're talking, 1 in a million. So,
right?
So.
Yeah, and I know one of the cases that was identified, the person got the placebo. They didn't even get the vaccine. So it was kind of like, hey, boy, you really stretching. I was like, man, look, the side effect of not getting the vaccine is death. That's that.
The anti-vaccine people are using every trick in the book to scare you. So, for instance, now they're trying to say that the messenger RNA vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, Moderna, Pfizer, is going to modify your DNA, and they even coined a new term. You heard of GMO, genetically modified organisms.
Right.
Now they're calling it genetically modified humans, GMH. It's all garbage, right? Because the mRNA doesn't even get into the nucleus. It goes into, you remember your high school biology, gets into the cytoplasm of the cell, gets made into protein, never gets into your DNA. They're saying it causes infertility. They're just grasping at straws. They'll say anything they can to scare you. And unfortunately, it's all too effective. And I just remind people that right now, COVID-19 is the single leading cause of death on a daily basis in the United States. I'll say that again. COVID-19 is the single leading cause of death on a daily basis in the United States. And it was that way when it was 2,500 deaths per day. Now we're getting the 4,000 deaths per day. And so and remember, in the African-American community, 33% of the deaths are under the age of 65. These are, so let's bring it home. Let's think about a 50-year-old African-American mom. Okay. How old are her kids, you figure? 20, 22, just starting out in the world, trying to get a job. They still need help from their parents, maybe working on a construction site, maybe working in a family-owned business. More often than not, maybe not having the luxury to work via Skype and Zoom and getting exposed to the virus, bringing it home. That's the mom who's losing her life from COVID-19, and those are the ones we have to get vaccinated.
Yeah, man. I tell you, Dr. Hotez, I'm so afraid right now. What do you think is the prognosis? I mean, I had a friend of mine say to me, man, when you told us in May of last year that we wouldn't get back to church before January 2021, I thought you were lying. I thought you were crazy. And he said, man, I'm looking at this now. We're going to get back by 2022. I mean, this, as we're seeing the surges within surges, somebody made the statement that the Thanksgiving surge just started to materialize just before Christmas. The Christmas surge has really not materialized yet, and the New Year surge is down the road. So what do we? I mean, what can we hope for? Because I heard somebody give the staggering number that we could be looking at 1 million deaths in this country by the end of May.
And don't forget the January 6th surge, right? Because what happened in Washington, that's a super spreader event too, of the first order. So things are going to get bad. The good news is we have good vaccines coming. It turns out that the spike protein of the virus is a soft target. We can vaccinate provided we can get enough doses out there. And that's why I say it's our best hope. What we look like as a country, say by June or July, all depends on a national effort to get people vaccinated. If we can get, by the summer, 3/4 of the American population vaccinated, I don't want to say it's life completely normal, but you'll be able to hold services again in your church. We'll be able to bring people together. We'll be able to go to restaurants. Life will be good. It's a matter of getting everybody to the other side and not losing loved ones now at this terrible time. So it's all about how the Biden administration works with the state and city governments to make this happen. And so one of the things that I've been saying is, look, I want every public official right now to be able to articulate what they're doing to vaccinate the American people. What's their contribution? And when I talk to the journalists, I say, your first question as a journalist to anyone you talk to who's in elected office or as a public official has to be, what are you doing to fix this? Because we've squandered every opportunity. We've come up small each time. Now our back's against the wall. This is our last hope. The good news is we have good vaccines. As scientists, I don't want to overinflate our claims, but we delivered in the sense that we've got vaccines out. Now it's a matter of all hands on deck to make this happen. And what you're doing tonight, Dr. Cofield, is truly God's work in explaining to your community our communities why we're getting vaccinated. That's absolutely critical.
One of the things that I want to make sure people understand is the absolute necessity, Dr. Hotez, of the people following the protocols in terms of getting both vaccines and not getting a false sense of invincibility because they got one vaccine. Because I heard some people say, "Oh, I got my vaccine now, I'm ready to go," and it's like, "Whoa, wait a minute, no, you haven't finished yet. Just keep on wearing your mask, keep on physically distancing." Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this goes back to the clinical trials, and the original hope for all of these vaccines was they were going to be in a single dose. And the reality was, when we saw the data, my heart sank a little bit, and that the single dose didn't do much of anything. It did not. In some people, it gave really good levels of virus neutralizing antibody, but more often than not, pretty much nothing. And so what that means is maybe only half the individuals who get a single dose are going to respond and are going to be protected. The good news is by the time people get their second dose, everybody gets high levels of virus neutralizing antibody, and it's 95% protective. But it's clear that if this thing's going to work, everybody's got to get their 2 doses. And it's really important, if the Biden administration has this new plan where they want to pull out all the doses now, they better make damn sure that the second dose is available for everybody. Otherwise, what you're going to see are a lot of people who are going to get sick and go to the hospital even though they got that first dose. And it's undermined confidence in the vaccine program. So we're at a critical time right now.
Okay, so Dr. Hotez, I'm going to ask you a very, very simple question, and I think I'm asking a question that I can hear other people asking. So if you take a dose and it's going to, for some, take them over, for others, just barely get you started on the road to being safe, why not just give people twice as much when they come for their first vaccine? I mean, just a simple mind that says, okay, if half is good.
Yeah, no, a lot of people ask me that, and the reason is, it's not a matter of the amount you get the first time around. The way the human immune response works is what's called prime and boost. The immune system has to first see it. They have to make those memory B cells, as they're called, and then they make a huge response the second time around. That's just how the immune system works. If you think about it, almost all the vaccines that we have are at least 2-dose vaccines for polio and diphtheria and pertussis and tetanus and Haemophilus influenza type B. And the Shingrix vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine. The only exceptions are live virus vaccines. They seem to operate a little differently. So the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, is a live virus. That seems to work pretty well in a single dose, although even that one now we're giving 2 doses because it works even better when you give 2 doses. The yellow fever vaccine, if you travel to Brazil, get a yellow fever vaccine. That's a live virus vaccine that can work in a single dose. But those are the exceptions, not the rule.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. So, Dr. Hotez, as we move forward with this and we lean into this, we have a new administration coming in. It sounds like the answer is not what we're seeing right now. I hear some people talking about including FEMA in the distribution of the vaccine, but it appears that it's not a one size fit all solution, that we're going to have to really think without a box to really make this work.
Well, I think we're going to need help from the federal government. And I was like you, I talk a fair bit to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and she has some ideas, maybe to bring in FEMA, maybe the National Guard, maybe the military. We're going to need some federal help. The whole reason we failed in 2020 is the Trump administration said, you know what? Nope, the federal government's only going to be in the background. The states have to be in the lead. The states have to be in the lead. The states never had the ability to fight this pandemic on their own. They didn't have the horsepower scientifically. They didn't have the logistics. They didn't have the epidemiologic models. They were shooting blind, and that's the reason why we're now moving towards 400,000 lives lost. And I kept on sending plan after plan to the White House to say, look, try this one, try this one. Nope, they weren't going to do it. States have to be in the lead, and that's going to be one of the important stories to tell. And when we write up the history of this epidemic. So I think Congresswoman now is in a position to say, there's things we can do now. There are levers we can pull and push in this Biden administration that we couldn't do in the Trump administration. That's going to be really important.
Do you think, in light of the politics, and I know you're not a politician, but in light of the politics, in light of even what happened on Wednesday, questioning election results and Republican leadership in states, we saw, for example, here, we did not expand, as you know, Medicaid coverage here in Texas, even though we were paying for it with our tax dollars, because our Republican leadership in the state did not want to be seen consorting, I guess, in their minds, with Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. Do you see politics coming into play here to keep us from distributing this, because this is going to be a new administration?
Anything is, as we know now, anything is possible.
Yeah.
But I listening to, because I'm on the Texas Task Force for Infectious Diseases, so I have access to, some of the thought leaders in Austin, and I think they're worried enough and scared enough, and they realize that this is our last chance to save lives. I mean, unfortunately, Texas has been one of the, the United States has been the epicenter of the world in terms of COVID-19 deaths. Texas is the epicenter of the United States. Texas is kind of one of the worst places in the world right now for COVID-19. We're heading up to almost 2 million confirmed cases. And remember what that means. The confirmed cases underestimate by about a factor of 5. So we're talking, 2 million times 5. That's 10 million Texans that have already been infected. We're looking at a third of the population's already been infected. And that's why we've had 30,000 deaths here in the state of Texas. That's a huge number. I mean, just to give you a sense of that, I looked it up. The number of American GIs from Texas who gave their life in World War II is what? I had to look it all up, so you don't have to expect to know the answer. 20,000. 20,000. Wow. The number of Texans who lost their lives in the Civil War is between 3 and 20,000. The Galveston flood in 1900, the Galveston hurricane, 8,000. So we are looking at the worst disaster in the history of the state of Texas in terms of lives lost. And right now, the only thing that's preventing those numbers from doubling or tripling is getting Texans vaccinated. So I think they get it as well. And I think, maybe you hate to see requires such a terrible tragedy to bring people together, but maybe this is but it's going to be.
Well, Dr. Peter Hotez, thank you so much. As we get ready to let you go, I know you have to get ready for CNN. Just give us your final thoughts. Somebody may have just tuned in as we're talking about this vaccine and trying to get on top of COVID-19 before it strangles our entire country and the entire world. What would you like to say to our listening audience?
What I'd like to say is our back's up against the wall. We've failed on COVID-19 in so many ways in 2020. Now we have our vaccines. This is our one chance to get out of it. And if we work together and everybody agrees to get vaccinated and everyone who wants to get vaccinated gets vaccinated by the summer, I think we could be looking at a incredibly high quality, robust quality of life again. But we have to make that commitment.
Well, Dr. Peter Hotez, Baylor College of Medicine, thank you so much for taking time out. We'll definitely have you back if you can fit us in and keep us updated on what's happening and what's going on.
Thank you, Dr. Cofield. I'll make it a priority. You know, the goalposts keep moving. So, you know, I often look at what I said 6 months ago or even 2 months ago, and sometimes I cringe a little bit because I can't believe I said that, because this thing changes so much. So, you know, a month from now, the landscape may look very different. I'd be happy to come back and share my thoughts with you again. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much. That was Dr. Peter Hotez from the Baylor College of Medicine with us. He is a national correspondent and expert for CNN and MSNBC, and I really thank him for coming. He's been on Impact Houston Live before, and so I want to thank Minister Chris Johnson for helping put us together. But man, I'm telling you, if you don't do anything else, man, work and get that vaccine. I know the registration sites have been hard to get into and hard to get booked, but I did see several people get appointments after they got on the waiting list, and they're making these appointments, I think, in 15-minute increments. It's really not a long, hard, or difficult process. You just need to make sure you're not allergic to any of the ingredients in the vaccine, and they keep you for 20 minutes to observe you to make sure you don't have any allergic reactions. If you have a problem with allergies, I would certainly suggest that you take an EpiPen with you, as doctors have suggested. But man, the opportunity is out there. You want to get registered. For the Pfizer vaccine, you have to wait 3 weeks before you get that second dose. For the Moderna vaccine, you have to wait 4 weeks. And so I will get my second dose sometime in February, first part of February. And here's what's interesting. You know, we're talking about 1A and 1B and 1C, but here's what you need to have in order to register to get the vaccine now in the public settings. And the mayor is opening up mega vaccine centers and is looking to add more as we move forward. The question is just making sure we have the vaccines and we have the staff to administer the vaccine. But basically, this is almost everybody in our community when you think about it. If you're over 18 and if you have an underlying health condition, obesity is an underlying health condition. It's not whether you think you're fat or not, right? You know, we're talking about the body mass index. And I don't know of many African Americans who, based on the BMI, are not obese, if not morbidly obese. Diabetes, heart disease, right? COPD, high blood pressure. Those are all underlying conditions. And the standards say if you have one of those, then, you know, you need to get this vaccine. You qualify for the vaccine. And it's interesting because you'll see people, for example, who have died of COVID-19, and you have people who have said, you know, well, you know, he had no underlying conditions. And you look at the picture of the person, it's like, man, he was overweight. You know, that is a health condition. So I really want to encourage you to take the words of Peter Hotez, take the words of the doc, and take them seriously. Don't allow the anti-vaccine people out there to keep you from tapping in to what you need to live. And especially those of us who have children, grown children who are coming and going. My youngest son went to Florida, and he went to a wedding of a friend. And I'm like, man, what do you mean you went to Florida for a wedding? And he was like, yeah, I was gonna stop by and holler at you. I said, no, man, you got to go get a COVID test first. Matter of fact, you need to get a COVID test before you go home to your family, right? You need to get a COVID test, man. You don't want to endanger anybody with that. And I have pre-existing conditions. So I'm like, hey, no, it's not going to happen. My wife and I, we made a decision this year. They were like, well, what you going to do for Christmas? I was like, be home. Me and her, me and him, we're going to be home. And, we'll FaceTime you, and, you drop presents off. We'll drop presents off. Y'all stop by, pick them up, but man, no, we're not going to do that, because this is nothing to play with. And especially because people are responding and reacting differently. Next week on Real World, Real Talk, let me tell you what I want to talk about. I'm going to talk, among other things, about the Biden plan, the Lift Every Voice plan. And I want to bring in a guest who was part of the team of people who authored the Lift Every Voice plan, and talk about what our expectations need to be of the Biden administration. There are those who say that President Obama did not do enough for the African American community. But I don't remember there ever being a plan laid out by President Obama or anyone in that administration for how the African American community would be positively impacted by his presidency. Now, no question, there was inspiration, there was great joy, and as Mitch McConnell said, there are some who looked at the election of President Obama as the final linchpin in the reparations for African American people. That's what he said. He said, we already have reparations. It's called the Civil Rights Movement and the election of President Obama. That being said, this is a plan, and this is a strategy. And the question is, what can we expect from it, and how do we hold them accountable for this? You've heard me say often, if you're not willing to fight for what you want, then don't get mad when people don't give you what you want. You have to be willing to fight for it. So many other things happened this week, but I want to thank Dr. Peter Hotez for being with us so long. Man, I only expected him to give us a couple of minutes, and so I really, really appreciate him taking time to be with us, to share with us the information that is out there. And remember, man, we've got to do our part to fight this disease. We've got to do our part to save our lives. Want to send out a special shout out and congratulations to my brothers and sisters in the state of Georgia for doing a tremendous job in that election of Senator-elect Warnock and Senator-elect Ossoff. They will take their place in the Senate, and it's going to be a battle, because the Senate is going to be split, and the deciding vote, when there is a tie, is the Vice President of the United States. And that's none other than Vice President-elect, soon to be Vice President Kamala Harris. And so hopefully things will change. And I will tell you this as I prepare to let you go. Several years ago, I was in a meeting with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and we just elected a new president, President Barack Obama. And the first year had gone by, and she was frustrated. And when you're around somebody who's frustrated with somebody, she doesn't want to call them out. She doesn't want to talk bad about the president, but she is upset. And she is upset because she feels like a tremendous opportunity is being squandered, because the Democrats had the House, the Democrats had the Senate, and now the Democrats had the White House. And President Obama was more concerned and more committed to trying to build consensus with Republicans, because he came in thinking if we can just, talk things out, we can come to a common goal. And he did not understand that there were people who were fighting against him and who would not support him for two reasons. One, because he was black. And secondly, because he was a Democrat, and he was going to lose on both points. The rest is history. He lost the midterm election. Many of the seats that he lost the majority at the midterm election, and he was fighting uphill from that point forward, which is why he had to do a lot of things through executive order. This time, I think Nancy Pelosi, being part of that history, is going to do some things strategically different. So, for example, will they vote to impeach the president next week? I expect them to do that. And I think they should do that. What he did was treasonous. It's just a blessing that congressional leaders and senators did not lose their life in the midst of what was going on under the hands of those domestic terrorists. But what will the Senate do? Well, I don't think the Senate is going to get that bill of impeachment until after the Senate changes over and becomes Democratic. And then things are going to get interesting. This is Dr. DZ Cofield signing off for Real World, Real Talk on The Choice 90.9 KTSU. We are your community station. Look forward to seeing you next week. Listen, make sure you stay warm, stay masked up. Make sure you wash your hands, physically distance, do all of those things that you need to do to make sure you stay around, because you are a gift and the world would be a much worse place without you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode.
All right, everybody. Appreciate y'all. Take care so much. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.